Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this, especially in a week like this, week of Yom Zikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut. I think it's especially important for us to take a moment and think about where we stand. And I was so glad that you opened your remarks in the introduction by saying fellow Zionists. It is a week of mourning and celebration. And I want to start by saying that, we live certainly here in the United States in a time of hyperpartisanship and in which we are essentially a bifurcated nation with people reading, listening, and watching different media depending on their political affiliations. And everything that happens can be viewed in a political context and only viewed in that way. And I think many American Jews are like that too. But I want to take us out of that for a moment, out of the pro and con Netanyahu arguments, the pro and con Biden arguments, or the pro and con Trump arguments. Because our situation as Jews and as supporters of Israel is really unique. I don't think you can overestimate the seriousness of the situation that we are facing. It is, without a doubt, the most challenging moment in Jewish history since the Holocaust. And the October 7th attack on Israel, we understand, those of us who have been there, we saw the sites. It's kind of like visiting the camps, the sites of the camps in, the Holocaust. And we understand what Israel is going through, or at least we should. But I think many American Jews have awakened to a world in which they are also under attack. And that's really what's different now. And with a revival of anti-Zionism, the mainstreaming of it, and the surge in anti-Semitism, we are facing a very different challenge as American Jews, as Zionists, and as supporters of Israel. Now, some things are the same and some things are different. And that's how I think we need to approach this. Israel's security and diplomatic situation is obviously very challenging right now. As the New York Times, perhaps overeager in its headline over the weekend saying that Israel was isolated, well, they're kind of right. Israel is more or less isolated. The rest of the world has largely turned on it. And its military situation is such, obviously the October 7th attacks, the ongoing war in Gaza, the grievous losses that Israel has gone through both on October 7th and since then. This is, incredibly challenging. And I think all of us who care about Israel, we're sad, we're frustrated and angry. Even 7 months later, we're still staggering from that. And we're also frustrated and angry about the hypocrisy and lies of much of the world in describing what has happened since then. And in terms of the double standards, judging Israel's conduct, attempts to limit its ability to defend itself, and also, and this hits close to home for me as a journalist, the tremendous bias that has been shown in the coverage of the war, in which many of the corporate mainstream media outlets have more or less become Hamas's stenographers in many of the ways that they approach this, even as the casualty figures, the vastly exaggerated, and as some scholars, as people I've interviewed say, these are clearly fake, they're still using them. But in some ways, that's kind of the world Israel has always lived in. This is a degree of scale, the situation is worse, but Israel has always faced these challenges of the world being against it, viewing its security challenges as of no account, the media bias. This is an ongoing story. But what's different now is what's happening here for us as American Jews and as supporters of Israel. In my adult lifetime, we've never seen anything like the mainstreaming of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And what's happened in the last 7 months, not just on college campuses, but we're certainly focusing on that. It's fundamentally different than the challenge that American Jews have faced in the last 80 years, and certainly the 76 years since Israel's rebirth. What has made it different is the change in our culture, the change in the institutions that many of us look to. The long march of sort of the radical left, who have imposed what we call woke, for lack of a better term, of ideology, critical race theory, intersectionality, the sort of woke catechism of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is not just changing the conversation, it's attempting to change America. And what I think a lot of us viewed the discussion about these ideas for the past few years is that it was just part of the partisan culture war, Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives. But I think as some of us picked up on in the last few years, but not all of us, is that these ideologies, they're terrible for America. They lock us in a permanent conflict over race, which divides and hurts this country. But they also grant a permission slip to anti-Semitism, because in this attempt to divide the world into two groups perpetually at war of white oppressors and people of color who are victims, they define Jews and Israel as white oppressors. That makes no sense because of all the persecution we've suffered, and some Jews want to be included in that, saying, wait, no, include us as one of the protected groups. But it doesn't work because, and it's true to its neo-Marxist roots, they will never accept Jews as among the oppressed. We always fit into that, and that is changing everything for us. This is a neo-Marxist war on Western civilization, and America's vision of itself as a bastion of freedom. And the thing about that is that it destroys American exceptionalism. And American exceptionalism, a concept much debated, has always been the one guarantee of American Jewish freedom and prosperity. That's why this country is different. Woke ideology is a threat to America in the long run, but as we've seen in the last 6 months, it is a clear and present danger to American Jews. Not just our kids on college campuses who are finding themselves in deeply hostile environments, but in the way that arguments about Israel that would never have received platforming in major institutions, major outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post, what we would have easily defined as anti-Semitism is now considered something that reasonable people should agree to disagree about. We don't accept that. So that, in some ways, the challenge to American Jewry is more serious to the one to Israel, and it affects our ability to help Israel. Israel is under siege, and it's still bleeding. But what I found during my recent visit to Israel, I spent most of February there, is that, as sad as it can be and as worrisome as its challenges are, it is still resilient. I found a country where its young people were willing to fight to defend it, willing to risk themselves, and not just kids, but men in their 30s and 40s, willing to risk their lives, leave their businesses. I couldn't help but be inspired by the spirit. As much as there is political division and trauma, the spirit of Israel is resilient. I was inspired by what I found in Israel, as much as I am depressed by a lot of what is going on in this country. American Jews are now being tested. And the question is, will we effectively stand up for our rights and our ability to be authentically and faithfully Jewish in the public square? What can only be defined as a pro-Hamas moment and a movement in the West is effectively destroying the one thing that might have changed the situation in the Middle East for the better. Had Israel been allowed to destroy Hamas quickly and effectively, there was a chance that, as it happened at the end of World War II, when Germany was forced to reject the ideology and Germans saw the consequences of following a genocidal movement, Palestinians, had they seen the world turn on them, as they should have after October 7th, and Hamas to be destroyed, they might have, that might have been the moment for the political sea change among the Palestinians in their culture that would have allowed for peace, which has never been allowed, whether we were talking about Hamas or Fatah. So that is deeply depressing. All of this support for so-called pro-Palestine so-called, the people chanting from the river to the sea and globalize the Intifada. They're not endangering Israel so much as they are endangering American Jews, and they're sending the message to the Palestinians that they can hold on to their fantasy of destroying Israel. And that just dooms them and Israel to unlimited conflict for as long as we can see. So my closing thoughts to you is that as we approach these problems, let's be realistic. Let's avoid magical thinking, whether it's magical thinking of the left about how a peace can be achieved despite everything we know about the current situation, or magical thinking on the right about making the Palestinians disappear. Let's stick to the world as it is. As a journalist, that's my job. The rest of us need to do that as well. But as Jews, as Zionists, as supporters of Israel, we also need two other things. We need faith in the justice of our cause, because despite all of the calumnies that have been thrown at Israel, all the ways, the effort to redefine Zionism as racism, an old Soviet era propaganda talking point, we need to have faith in the justice of our cause. We cannot allow ourselves to be talked into abandoning that. And just as, if not more important, the one quality that we need, and it's not just the information to refute the lies about Israel, it's the courage to speak up. That's what we are sometimes missing in our American Jewish culture, the courage to speak up and fight for what we believe in, for what we know to be right. If we retain our faith and we find the courage to speak, I have no doubt that Israel and the cause of Zionism, wherever we are, will prevail. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. The key words, it seems like, that you brought up was resilience, courage, and faith. And if we can all remember that, I think we should all be part of that great Zionist feeling. Jonathan, as a couple of questions might come in, I just wanted to ask you if you saw any type of discussion while you're over in Israel about the North and the feelings about what's happening in the North.
Well, I certainly did, and spoke to people from there. And if you're in Israel, one of the things you notice, as if you even just go along the boardwalk in Tel Aviv, along the beach, and you walk into the hotels, you'll see, wow, the hotels are full. But they're not full of tourists for the most part, although there are fortunately, some American Jews who are going. They're full of Israelis who are basically refugees in their own country, people from the South, as well as all the people from the communities along the northern border whose homes have been rendered uninhabitable by the fire from either Hezbollah in the north or Hamas in the south. And that cannot stand. One of the reasons why I think Israel has to finish off Hamas in Rafah is that people can't go home. And until Hamas is finished off, Israel isn't going to be able to address the threat from Hezbollah. Just yesterday, one of the, Iron Dome can't stop anti-tank missiles. And just yesterday, we saw a firing of an anti-tank missile that, that killed some people in the north. So, I think there is a strong belief among many people that I spoke to that once the situation in Gaza is, if not completely resolved, but stabilized, then Israel must address the situation in the north. It cannot go on with all of the border communities being basically turned into ghost towns. That's not just merely a victory for Israel's enemies, but it's not a viable solution for a country. It's bad enough that you have hundreds of thousands of men who have left their jobs and are serving in the army, and Israel has to pay their salaries, the government, and as well as pay the hotel bills of all the people who have been forced to become refugees in their own country. That's a fact. I try to mention this whenever I'm on, secular media. This is the most underreported aspect of, story in this war is all the Jewish refugees.